The small Spanish town of Algit was the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else. It was the mid-1990s, a time when life in this quiet community was simple, almost uneventful. Parents felt safe letting their children play in the streets, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and crime seemed like something that only happened in distant cities. But all of that was about to change in a single night. A night that would haunt Algit forever. It was the evening of April 19th, 1997, when 16-year-old Eva Balnco left her home to meet friends. She was bright, full of energy, with a spark that made her stand out in any crowd. That evening was no different. Eva laughed, joked, and enjoyed the company of her classmates. For her, it was just another night of being a teenager, of tasting freedom in the safety of her small town. But destiny had already written a darker ending for her story, when the night began to fade into silence. Eva did not return home, at first. Her parents thought she might have stayed a little longer with friends, but as the hours dragged on, worry turned into panic. Her family knew Eva was responsible, that she wouldn't simply disappear without saying a word. Something was terribly wrong. By dawn, Eva's absence had become a nightmare. Her parents reached out to neighbors, then to the police. Search parties were quickly organized, and word spread like fire through Algit. The entire town seemed to come alive with fear and dread, every corner hiding the possibility of something sinister. Mothers held their children closer. Fathers volunteered to comb through fields and roads. The air was heavy, thick with a sense of doom that no one could shake. Later that day, the unthinkable happened. On a deserted stretch of road outside the town, searchers came across a horrifying sight. There, in the stillness of the morning, lay the lifeless body of Eva Balnco. She had been brutally attacked, her young life stolen in a storm of violence that no one in Algit could have imagined. The news spread like wildfire. People who had known Eva since she was a child broke down, in tears. Others whispered in shock, unable to comprehend how something so monstrous could happen in their quiet, ordinary town. The streets that once felt safe now felt poisoned, haunted by the cruelty of a killer still lurking in the shadows. The police moved quickly, sealing off the crime scene, searching for clues. But behind their professionalism, even they were shaken. The brutality of the crime was overwhelming. This wasn't just murder, it was rage, obsession, something deeply personal. Whoever had done this hadn't simply taken a life. They had shattered an entire community. As investigators began their work, one fact became clear. This was not going to be an ordinary case. This was the beginning of a mystery that would twist and turn for nearly 2 decades, dragging detectives, scientists, and even entire families into its dark web. And it all began here, on this lonely road in Algit, with the broken body of a girl who had once been full of life. The town mourned, the parents wept, and the world grew darker. Eva's story was far from over. It was only beginning. The morning after Eva's body was discovered, Algit felt like a different town. Streets once filled with laughter and chatter now echoed with whispers and tears. Parents who once waved their children off to school now clutched their hands tightly, afraid to let go. Fear had seeped into every corner, and with it came the haunting question that everyone was asking, but no one could answer. Who could do this? Detectives descended on the crime scene, moving carefully, combing the ground for evidence. The stillness of the countryside was broken only by the clicking of cameras, the rustle of plastic bags, and the quiet, grim conversations of men and women who who had seen too much death in their lives. But even for seasoned investigators, this scene felt different. It was as if they were staring into the abyss of pure evil. Ava's body bore the marks of a vicious struggle. She had fought desperately to live. Her hands, her clothes, even the dirt beneath her fingernails told the story of her resistance. But the violence she endured was overwhelming, far beyond what anyone expected. This was not the work of a random stranger passing through town. It felt deliberate. It felt personal. The first theory was simple. Someone from Algit had done this. Someone who knew Eva, or who had watched her long enough to know her routines. The thought sent chills through the community. Suddenly, every familiar face seemed suspicious. Neighbors eyed each other with distrust. The friendly baker, the quiet mechanic, the young man who delivered groceries. No one was above suspicion anymore. Police questioned Ava's friends, retracing her final steps on that fateful night. They learned that she had left her group around midnight, saying she was heading home. But somewhere between the laughter of her friends and the silence of the road, she had vanished. Had she been followed, lured into a car, ambushed? The possibilities were endless, and each one more horrifying than the last. Investigators quickly realized this would not be solved overnight. They began canvassing the area, knocking on doors, interviewing anyone who might have seen something. Witnesses reported seeing cars on the road late at night, headlights cutting through the darkness. But memories were hazy, details unclear. Fear had a way of clouding the mind. Then came the forensic work. Samples were collected, fingerprints lifted, fibers bagged. But in 1997, forensic science was not what it is today. DNA analysis was in its infancy, slow and expensive. Still, the detectives clung to hope. Somewhere in the evidence was the killer's mistake, the tiny fragment of truth that would point to Ava's murderer. But as days turned into weeks, frustration grew. Leads dried up, suspects were questioned and released, and the community's grief deepened. Candlelight vigils were held. Ava's face appeared on posters, and her parents stood before cameras begging for justice. Yet behind closed doors, even the police admitted what everyone feared. They were chasing shadows every night. Algit fell into silence, broken only by the echo of that unanswered question. Who had taken Eva? Who among them carried this terrible secret? The killer was out there, somewhere close, watching, waiting, hidden in plain sight. And the nightmare was only beginning. By the third week after Ava's death, Algit was no longer the same quiet Spanish town it had once been. Fear had taken root, spreading like a disease, twisting ordinary routines into something sinister. Mothers escorted their daughters to school. Fathers insisted their children be home before dark, and young girls who once lingered on the streets, laughing and playing now, walked in hurried silence, constantly looking over their shoulders. The killer was still out there, somewhere nearby, and the thought was unbearable. Every home had its whispers. Some claimed Eva had been targeted by a jealous lover. Others were sure it was the work of a stranger who prowled the streets at night, waiting for the right victim. But the darkest rumor of all was that Ava's killer was someone they all knew. Someone who blended so seamlessly into daily life that no one would ever suspect them. This possibility made the tension suffocating. Shopkeepers eyed their customers nervously. Neighbors stopped chatting in the streets. Trust had crumbled, replaced by paranoia. Even the most innocent faces could no longer be trusted. The police felt that pressure more than anyone, each day. They worked tirelessly, chasing leads that seemed promising at first but evaporated under scrutiny. Every time they thought they were close, the truth slipped through their fingers like smoke. Detective Javier Moreno, one of the lead investigators, began to obsess over the case. He spent nights poring over files, rereading statements, staring at crime scene photos until the images burned into his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the answer was staring him in the face, hidden among the ordinary details, mocking him. Then, a breakthrough, or at least what seemed like one. A witness, a young man from the neighboring town, came forward. He claimed he saw a car parked along the road near where Ava's body was later found. The car, he said, looked familiar, but in the darkness, he couldn't be sure. When pressed for details, his memory faltered. Was it green, blue? Was it a sedan or a hatchback? His account shifted with every telling, leaving the police frustrated but unwilling to dismiss it. Rumors spread faster than facts, and soon the entire town was buzzing with theories about the mysterious car. Some residents began whispering names, pointing fingers at people they disliked or distrusted. The police tried to control the narrative, but it was too late. Paranoia had already infected the streets. Meanwhile, Ava's family remained trapped in grief. Her parents, broken but determined, pleaded with the authorities for answers. They refused to let her memory fade, vowing that justice would come, no matter how long it took. Their strength fueled the community's anger, but it also deepened the sense of helplessness. And through it all, the killer remained silent, watching, blending into the crowd, perhaps even attending vigils, standing among the mourners, pretending to grieve. No one knew, and that was the most terrifying part. People of Algiers didn't yet realize it, but this case was about to take a darker turn. The investigation would drag them into shadows they were not prepared to face, because the truth about Ava's murder wasn't just buried in the evidence. It was buried in the hearts of those closest to her. The weeks dragged on, and with every passing day, the tension in Algiers tightened like a noose. The streets still bustled during the day, but at night the town transformed. Doors were locked early, blinds drawn shut, and the silence was broken only by the occasional bark of a restless dog. Fear wasn't just lingering anymore. It had settled into the bones of the town. Detective Javier Moreno became more and more consumed by the case. His colleagues noticed the changes in him, the dark circles under his eyes, the constant muttering as he replayed events in his head, the short temper when leads went nowhere. To Javier, Eva was no longer just a victim. She was a puzzle, one he had to solve at any cost. One night, as he pored over the case file again, a chilling thought crossed his mind. What if the killer wasn't a stranger at all? What if the murderer was someone who had been at Ava's funeral, crying alongside the others? Someone who walked among them freely, while the town drowned in paranoia. The possibility was too strong to ignore. The police began looking inward. Friends, neighbors, classmates, one by one, people from Ava's life were called in for questioning. Some were cooperative, others defensive. Every word, every expression, every hesitation was dissected. But still, no one fit the profile completely. Then came a disturbing discovery. Forensic reports revealed that Eva hadn't just been murdered, she had been watched. Evidence showed she was followed in the days leading up to her death. Someone had been tracking her movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. This was no random act of violence. It was deliberate, planned. The town's fear deepened. People began questioning even their closest friends. Could the killer be the neighbor who offered to help carry groceries? The friendly shopkeeper who always smiled, or even a teacher who stayed late at school. At the same time, the media descended on Algid like vultures. Reporters filled the streets, thrusting microphones into grieving parents' faces, spinning sensational headlines that only heightened the hysteria. And while the cameras rolled, the killer remained hidden, possibly enjoying the chaos he had created. For Ava's parents, the circus was unbearable. They withdrew from the public eye, clinging to one another, haunted by the idea that the person responsible might be someone they had once welcomed into their home. And through it all, Javier's obsession grew. He began walking the streets late at night, retracing Ava's steps, standing where her body had been found, searching for anything that might have been missed. Sometimes, he swore he felt eyes on him, watching from the darkness, but every time he turned, the streets were empty. The town of Algit was crumbling under the weight of suspicion, and the real danger was that the killer, emboldened by his freedom, might strike again, because Ava's death wasn't the end of the story, it was only the beginning. In Algit, life tried to move forward, but the shadows of Ava's murder refused to fade. Children no longer played in the parks without parents watching closely. Couples whispered in cafes, their voices trembling as if speaking too loudly might summon the killer. Every smiling face was now suspect. Every friendly wave a mask hiding something sinister. Detective Javier Moreno felt the weight of the town's fear pressing down on him. The case had consumed him entirely, leaving little room for sleep, family, or even food. His desk was buried in notes, photographs, and maps. Yet he felt like he was chasing a ghost, an enemy who seemed to vanish. Just when he thought he was close, then came the first anonymous letter. It arrived at the police station, addressed directly to Javier. The envelope was plain, the handwriting neat but unsettlingly precise. The message inside chilled him. "You're looking in the wrong places. She was never the only one. Soon, you'll understand." Javier's hands trembled as he read the words. Was this from the killer? Or was it a cruel prank from someone feeding on the town's misery? The letter contained no fingerprints, no traceable ink, no DNA. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. The detective could no longer deny. If this wasn't just about Eva anymore, this was about control, about fear, about a predator who thrived on watching others suffer. As the days passed, more letters followed, each one taunting, each one dripping with arrogance. Some described Javier's own movements, almost as if someone was following him. "You walk the streets at night, but you're never alone." Others hinted at secrets about Ava's life, details the police had never released. It was proof the writer wasn't an outsider. The killer was close. Javier began to spiral. His colleagues worried about him, but he brushed off their concern. He couldn't stop now. He began carrying the letters everywhere, rereading them, over and over, searching for hidden meanings. At night, his dreams turned into nightmares of faceless figures whispering in Ava's voice, calling him to find the truth. Meanwhile, the town itself was tearing apart. Families argued over who could be trusted. Rumors spread like wildfire. A neighbor seen burning clothes in his backyard. A teacher rumored to have a dark past. A local shopkeeper who closed early on the night of the murder. None of it could be confirmed, but paranoia had taken root so deeply that no one felt safe anymore. And in the midst of this chaos, the killer walked freely, smiling, blending in, hiding behind the mask of normalcy. No one suspected that he might be standing right next to them at the grocery store. or sitting silently behind them in church. The scariest part was not knowing, and the killer knew that fear was his greatest weapon. Javier understood something then. This wasn't just a crime to solve. This was a game, and the killer was always one step ahead. But the detective made himself a silent promise as he gripped the latest letter in his hands. I will unmask you, even if it destroys me. The nights in Alget had grown colder, sharper, as if the town itself recoiled from what still walked among them. For Detective Javier Moreno, every sound in the silence now carried meaning. The shuffle of footsteps behind him, the flicker of a light in an empty house, the quiet scrape of a chair in the station after midnight. He was no longer sure if he was hunting the killer or if the killer was hunting him. The letters hadn't stopped. In fact, they had grown bolder. One arrived with a small lock of hair, blonde, tied with a thin red ribbon. Another contained a crude sketch of Ava's face, but with the eyes blacked out. And then came the one that made Javier's blood turn to ice. You've already spoken to me. Look closer. For days, Javier replayed every interaction he'd had since the murder. Neighbors, shopkeepers, witnesses, colleagues. The realization gnawed at him. The killer wasn't in the shadows anymore. He was in plain sight, hiding behind a familiar face, laughing at Javier's blindness. Driven to the edge, Javier began tailing people he once trusted. A fellow officer, a friendly bartender, even the priest who had given Ava's funeral sermon. He scribbled theories in notebooks, until the pages tore under the pressure of his pen. The case was eating him alive. And then, one evening, the game reached its breaking point. A final letter appeared on his doorstep. No postmark, no delivery trace. Only 5 words written in red ink. Come alone, or she dies. Attached was a photograph, grainy, black and white, showing a young woman, gagged, her terrified eyes staring straight into the camera. Javier's heart slammed against his ribs. This wasn't just taunting anymore. Someone was alive. Another victim. The address scribbled on the back led to an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Javier didn't call for backup. He couldn't risk her life. He loaded his revolver, tucked the letters into his coat pocket, and drove into the suffocating darkness. The farmhouse loomed against the night, its windows like hollow eyes. The door creaked open as if expecting him. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint metallic tints of old blood. A single lantern burned on the floor, casting long twisted shadows on the walls. And then he heard it. A laugh, low, deliberate, echoing through the empty space. Detective, a voice purred from the darkness. I was starting to think you'd never come. Javier raised his gun, his breath shallow. Show yourself. From the shadows stepped a man he knew, a face Javier had passed dozens of times without suspicion. His stomach turned. This was no stranger. This was someone from Alget, someone who had watched Eva, who had walked among her neighbors, who had blended perfectly into their lives. The killer smiled. You made this far too easy. The woman in the photograph was there, bound to a chair, her muffled cries filling the silence. Javier's instincts screamed to act, but the killer moved closer, unafraid, taunting. You still don't get it, do you? The man whispered. Eva wasn't special. None of them are. This town hides monsters behind every smile. I'm just the only one brave enough to show mine. Javier's finger tightened on the trigger. Time slowed. The lantern flickered. For one fleeting second, he saw the mask slip, the madness, the delight in control. the hunger for more, and then a single gunshot cracked through the night. The farmhouse fell silent. The woman's sobs echoed as Javier cut her free, his hands trembling. But as he looked at the crumpled body of the killer on the floor, dread still coiled in his stomach, because he knew, deep down, that this was not an ending. The letters, the games, the whispers, one man couldn't have orchestrated it all. The killer had been right about one thing. Algit hid monsters, and Javier had only unmasked one of them. As dawn broke over the town, the detective stood outside. The farmhouse, the blood of the killer still on his hands. The case was closed. The town would sleep again, but Javier couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were still watching. The mask of normalcy remained, and somewhere, behind another smile, the darkness waited.